Hey everyone, ready to dive into another awesome story? Before we start, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of the exciting content coming up. And don't forget to comment on which stories you want to see here. Now let's jump right into it. Rebirth is just the starting point to reach the top. Tomb Intrusion, the rise of martial arts. In this story, the protagonist, Fang Ping, is sent 10 years back in time to a parallel world that closely resembles his own, except for one major difference. Martial arts are omnipresent and essential for securing a promising future. Note, the story takes place in 2006. Will Fang Ping achieve his goal and become a powerful martial artist to support the empire of his adorable little sister? Or will he fall and meet a tragic fate, like hitting his head on a block of tofu and dying? The way the main plot unfolds is one of the main reasons I enjoyed reading this manhwa so much. It's rich in details and connections that gradually come together as the story progresses. Let's go. Located in Yang City's junior high school, the protagonist, Fang Ping, had just come to terms with the shocking reality. He had been sent 10 years into the past. Or rather, it would be more accurate to say that he had ended up in a parallel world from 10 years ago, because there was one key difference between this place and his previous life. In the classroom, one of Fang Ping's classmates tells him and another friend that they only have 2 days left to register for a martial art and asks if they plan to do so. Fang Ping's friend replies that the registration fee is $10,000, and since he knows he won't pass, signing up would just be a waste of money. The classmate who asked the question says that he wants to register too, since it's the only path for an ordinary person to become extraordinary. Their conversation is interrupted when another student asks if they watched the news the night before, mentioning that there would be some exciting fights to watch. Fang Ping's classmates get excited about the news since it's about the fights in the Ice Kai tournament. However, Fang Ping himself isn't as thrilled. After all, he had already seen all of this before. Upon hearing a familiar name during the discussion, Fang Ping asks his friend if the Grandmaster Ma they're talking about is Manhua Peng. His friend immediately scolds him, saying it's disrespectful to call him by name. At least Fang Ping confirms that it really is the person he was thinking of. He quickly apologizes, saying something must be wrong with his mouth. He then realizes that asking too many questions might seem suspicious, so he decides it's best to look up the answers online. He asks his friend if there's a place near the school where he can use the internet, and his friend tells him there is, saying he goes there often. Fang Ping suddenly remembers that he used to visit that place too. It's a cafe with a stunning manager. He also recalls how, back in school, she would frequently appear in his dreams doing something embarrassing. After finishing his conversation with his classmates, he leaves school and heads toward the cafe, wondering what she looks like now. Puberty really is a troublesome thing. When the protagonist arrives at the cafe, he comes face to face with the so-called manager and is immediately taken aback. He questions whether his taste in women was worse when he was younger, as his memories seem vastly different from the reality before him. Noticing his presence, the manager gets excited and asks if he'd like to upgrade his account. She explains that the upgrade costs $50, but in return, he get a $10 discount. Fang Ping checks his pockets and quickly realizes he doesn't have much money on him. He tells her he only wants to spend $5. Seeing that he's broke but still wants to use the internet, she hands him a temporary access card. As Fang Ping browses on the computer, he suddenly realizes the urgency of taking the martial arts exam. In this world, there were unspoken rules that everyone understood. The most important one, no matter what you do, you must be a martial artist above all else. These fighters held high status and great power in society, and they were divided into 9 levels, level 1 being the lowest and level 9 the highest. Only martial artists were allowed to start a business, and you could only become a provincial governor if you reached level 4. The same applied to the entertainment industry. Essentially, becoming a martial artist was the only hope for many people to achieve success. Well, at least there's some variety. You either become a martial artist or you're screwed. That was exactly why his classmate Yang Jian had said earlier that their only chance of becoming powerful was through martial arts. But even so, taking the exam wasn't easy. The first hurdle was the registration fee, $10,000. And to make things worse, Fang Ping only had 2 days before the registration system opened. He needed at least one shot at taking the test. He then wonders whether his family is wealthy in this new reality. But as soon as he returns home, he realizes he's still living in the same cramped apartment as before. When he steps inside, everything looks exactly the same as his house in his original reality. He's immediately greeted by his younger sister, who runs up to him, accusing him of stealing her money. Surprised to see her still a child, he starts pinching her cheeks. In his past life, he always regretted that she had lost this adorable look as she grew older. Annoyed, his sister pushes his hands away and demands that he return her money. Fang Ping, still confused about the accusation, asks what she's talking about. She scolds him for playing dumb, saying their mother had given them $50 to split, but there were only $5 left on the table. Trying to act innocent, Fang Ping claims he has no idea what happened. He even tries turning the accusation around, suggesting that maybe she spent the money and forgot. He tells her to search for it again. Frustrated, his little sister storms off to their mother, demanding that she do something. Their mother, Lai Yuyin, sighs and tells them to stop fighting, reminding them that their father would be home for dinner soon. She looked younger than her actual age, and Fang Ping remembers that back then, she had to work a part-time job to support them while taking care of the household. Her job paid around $800 per month. That brings back some unpleasant memories of my own time as a young apprentice. Their conversation is cut short when their father arrives home. The first thing he asks is whether dinner is ready. Fang Ping's father, Fang Mingrong, is an ordinary factory worker. Due to his job, he inhales harmful chemicals every day, putting his health at risk. And for all that, his monthly salary is only $3,000, hardly worth the dangers he faces. His father turns to him, asking why he hadn't put away his school things yet, and tells him to take a shower and get ready for dinner immediately. Fang Ping quickly explains that he had just gotten home, but before their conversation can continue, his younger sister jumps in again, accusing him of stealing her money. She insists that he say something, but Fang Ping defends himself once more, telling his father not to listen to her since her accusation made no sense. A little later, the family sits down for dinner. As Fang Ping eats, he contemplates his situation. He has to accept that if he doesn't become a martial artist, there's nothing he can do to change his family's life. With that in mind, he gathers his courage and tells his father that he wants to take the martial arts exam. His family is stunned by the sudden announcement. Noticing their reaction, Fang Ping quickly tries to change the subject, saying he was just joking. However, his father surprises him by taking out a bank card, explaining that he had already heard about the exam fees from a coworker. He hands Fang Ping the card and tells him to withdraw the money and take the test the next day. He then adds that whether Fang Ping passes or not doesn't matter. What truly matters is that his heart remains good. Now that's a great example of a father. Despite how poor they were, his father was willing to give him such a large sum of money without hesitation. Not only that, but he also tried to ease Fang Ping's pressure, making sure he wouldn't feel overwhelmed by expectations. Seeing this, Fang Ping begins to wonder how he could ever repay his father's support if he failed. He then clenches his fists, determined. His rest was over. This time, he would definitely succeed in this new life. The next morning, Fang Ping heads to an ATM to withdraw the money. As soon as he takes the cash in his hands, a sudden notification appears before his eyes, stating that he has met the requirements for a neural link. This must be his cheat system. Kinda broken, huh? After returning home, he goes straight to his room and lies down on his bed, replaying what had happened at the ATM. He tries talking to the system, giving it various commands, but nothing happens. Frustrated, he finally snaps and demands that the system increase his blood Kai, threatening to beat it to death if it doesn't comply. That's when it finally reacts. His attributes immediately increase, and he feels an odd sensation throughout his body. Realizing that what he requested was actually happening, he suddenly panics. What if this system was using the hard-earned money his father had given him? He frantically looks around, searching for the cash, and only relaxes when he sees it right beside him, untouched. He sighs in relief. If that money had disappeared, he wouldn't have known how to explain it to his parents. At least using the system didn't seem to deplete his real-life funds. Meanwhile, his younger sister had been eavesdropping outside his room. Hearing him talking to himself, she shakes her head. Looks like he's finally lost it. The next day, back in class, Fang Ping listens as the teacher calls for silence. The instructor announces that any students registering for the martial arts exam should head to the teacher's office immediately. Fang Ping stands up, and one of his classmates smirks, asking if he's going to the bathroom again. A little embarrassed, he replies that he's actually going to register, catching his classmate off guard. When he arrives at the office, he sees a group of students already filling out their registrations. One of his classmates looks at him in surprise. "I never thought you'd be registering with us," she exclaims. "How much blood Kai and IQ do you have?" Fang Ping pauses, debating how he should respond. His stats were lower than average, so saying them out loud would be humiliating. Before he can answer, another student chimes in. He hasn't checked yet. Otherwise, he would have said something by now. With that, the group starts discussing their own stats, their voices filled with the usual energy of teenagers hyping themselves up for the big day. One of his classmates claims that the last time he checked at the hospital, his blood Kai was at 108 points. Since Fang Ping seemed physically weaker than him, there was no way his score would be higher. Hearing this, Fang Ping is left speechless at the massive difference between them. After all, his system had only shown a total of 1.1 points. His classmate suggests that Fang Ping come over to his house after school to check his stats. Another student, surprised, asks if his family had actually bought a blood dye and IQ measuring device. The classmate nods, explaining that he had to check his stats frequently, so his father bought a small home-use machine. However, he adds that while it's convenient, it's nowhere near as accurate as the ones in the city hospital. Even the cheapest model costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fang Ping is stunned. In his past life, a device like that would only cost a couple $100s at most. Just what kind of world is this? After school, Fang Ping follows his classmate home to measure his stats. Once the test is complete, he turns to his friend, waiting for the results. However, instead of answering right away, his friend simply stares at the screen, completely frozen in shock. Fang Ping begins to feel uneasy. Why is he looking at me like that? Finally, his classmate blurts it out. You got a total of 113 points. Came out on top, huh? Fang Ping quickly realizes that this world's measuring system is different from what he was used to. The machine's value of 113 had been simplified to 1.1 by his own system. His classmate, noticing Fang Ping's lack of reaction, asks why he isn't freaking out. He just got the second highest score in their entire class. Later that night, back home, Fang Ping hears his parents talking in their bedroom. His father, concerned, says he had heard from his supervisor at work that preparing for the martial arts exam would require spending at least $10,000 on high-nutrition food alone. He tells his wife that since their son had decided to take this path, they couldn't just sit back and do nothing. His mother, hesitant, replies that they only have $20,000 in savings. If that wasn't enough, they would find a way to get more. Their conversation is interrupted when Fang Ping's younger sister storms in, accusing him of lying. There was no way his score was that high. Fang Ping smirks, teasing her. I guess I'm just a genius. My chances of passing are looking pretty good, huh? His mother then calls him over, saying that she and his father have something to discuss. When he enters their room, his father stands up, handing him a large stack of money. He tells Fang Ping to use it to buy the best food possible to prepare for the exam. If it wasn't enough, he should let them know immediately. Once again, the old man proves what it means to be a great father. His father then continues, saying that in the past, their negligence had almost ruined his future. But from now on, they would give him everything he needed to succeed in the martial arts exam. Back in his room, Fang Ping sits on his bed, deep in thought. How am I going to spend this money? His biggest concern was medicine. If he chose the wrong type, it might have a weak effect, or worse, it could even harm him. The next morning, the protagonist was walking up the school stairs with the expression of a tired person. He started remembering that the day before, he had tried to increase his physique by 0.1, and he felt a sensation very similar to what he had experienced previously. His concentration, comprehension, and memory had improved significantly. His thoughts were interrupted when one of his classmates jumped on him, trying to knock him down. The protagonist got up, annoyed, while the classmate laughed, saying he had done a great job hiding his high score. Soon, the rest of his classmates gathered around him. One of them grabbed the friend who had tackled him, threw him aside, and then started staring at the protagonist before bursting into tears, complaining that it wasn't fair. He was clearly much stronger than the protagonist, yet he had 5 points less than him. Nothing is fair in this world, crybaby. Their conversation was cut short when a man arrived and handed them a set of books. The man told the protagonist to take them home and read them, explaining that everyone involved in martial arts had already studied these books. Since he had registered for the exams, he needed to study hard, especially because he had started later than the others. However, the man reassured him that he would do his best to help. The protagonist was happy to have a good teacher, considering that in his previous reality, he had barely interacted with his teachers. The teacher then told them they didn't need to attend class that day because he had a mission for them instead. They had to pick up a student from a martial arts university who had just arrived at the airport. When the guy saw them waiting for him, he introduced himself as Wang Jiayang. The protagonist thought he really just looked like a regular person despite being a martial artist. In an earlier meeting, all of his classmates were shocked to learn that he didn't know who this person was. One of the girls, who was a huge fan of Wang Jiayang, started explaining everything about him, his likes, dislikes, and even his physical traits. Despite coming from a financially struggling family, he was accepted into the university as the #1 student in the last exam. He was also the first student from a regular school to be accepted into that university. And even though he was still in his first year of college, he was already a martial artist, a living legend around here, apparently. Inside the bus, his classmates had prepared a grand welcome for him, which made Wang Ziyang feel a little awkward. One of them suggested they take advantage of the opportunity and asked him what his secret was to getting into a martial arts university. After thinking for a moment, he began to explain that everyone should already know martial arts exams had 5 major tests: political process, culture, profession, experience, and a physical test. The two most difficult among them were experience and the physical test. Even those with a score around 110 still had a chance of failing. However, if they could use their emotions correctly, the results would be different. He continued explaining how emotions could be used to improve performance. Joy and anger were two examples of emotions that could push ki and blood beyond their limits, especially anger. It was simple, but highly effective. He also mentioned that if someone had a bit of experience, the physical test wouldn't be as difficult since it was mainly about explosive strength, endurance, and flexibility exams. And then there was an interesting test. They would be given a chicken to kill. He asked if they would have the courage to do it, explaining that in the future, they would have to kill people, and that was much harder than killing a simple chicken. When the protagonist heard that, he realized Wang was speaking very naturally about it, which indicated he had probably killed someone before. He questioned whether, in a world where martial artists were restricted by law, they should even have the opportunity to kill people. Not to mention, he was still just a university student. A good fact to keep in mind. A little later, the protagonist returned home and his mother asked why he had come back so early. He replied that he had been given a mission to pick up a university student and take him to school so he could give a speech later. Now inside his room, he recalled Wang's words about killing people and how naturally he had said them. There was only one possibility. He had already killed someone before. Meanwhile, Wang answered a call. The person on the other end apologized for disturbing him, but said they had new information, stating that the suspect they were looking for was likely near the province where Wang was currently staying. Wang replied that he had already told them not to make any moves until he settled in and could resume the search for the suspect himself. The caller apologized again, explaining that this time they couldn't let him escape, which was why they were so desperate to resolve the situation quickly. Back in the protagonist's room, he was now increasing his blood and chi levels a little more, keeping the same pace as before minus 0.1 at a time. When he made the adjustment, he expected to feel the same sensation as before. However, he was suddenly overwhelmed by intense agony in his heart, followed by a sharp pain. The next morning, after waking up from his blackout caused by the excruciating pain the night before, he recalled the last time he had increased his stats, and it felt fine back then. He wondered why he had passed out this time. But then he quickly remembered that he had promised to take that university student to school for his lecture. He started running to make it on time. On his way, he accidentally bumped into a highly suspicious-looking guy but ignored him and kept going. If this were in Brazil, things would have gone a little differently. Inside the student's bus, the university student finally arrived, apologizing for being late. The protagonist's classmates started talking about how great their school was, considering that they had invited such a prestigious university student to give a lecture right before the martial arts exams. Fang asked his friend why it was such a big deal for a university student to return to his old school just to give a talk. His friend replied that if it were a regular university student, it wouldn't be anything special. But in Wang's case, things were different. He was a martial artist. He continued, telling the protagonist to think about it more carefully. There were very few martial artists in their city, and on top of that, Wang had already become a martial artist while still in his first year of university. That made him an incredibly remarkable person to them. As Wang passed by, he placed a hand on the protagonist's shoulder, stating that he knew he was doing his best to become a martial artist, but should be more careful about what his body was consuming. He went on to say that he didn't know what kind of medicine the protagonist was taking, but his blood and chi levels had increased significantly in a short period of time. Such medicines shouldn't be taken casually, as a single mistake could be extremely dangerous to his health. And if he kept relying only on medicine while neglecting physical training, it would only lead to an early death due to his own carelessness. The protagonist thanked him for the warning. Meanwhile, Fang thought to himself that this guy was definitely a real martial artist. He could sense that special thing about him so perfectly. His self-esteem was running a little high here. That same night, the protagonist was in his backyard, intensely training his body. When he finished his session, he noticed that he didn't feel too tired and sincerely questioned whether it was because of his increased blood and chi levels. As he expected, he really needed to listen to Wang more. As he was lost in thought, a sinister presence caught his attention. Looking to the window beside him, he saw that same guy he had bumped into earlier. However, he brushed it off, thinking he had probably just sensed a surge of bloodlust and was overthinking things again. His younger sister was watching the news as he walked through the living room. That was when he noticed something oddly familiar about a case the reporter was explaining. An anonymous man had killed someone using a knife. When he looked more closely, he saw that the man's hands had the same marks as the guy he had seen earlier. That night, the protagonist had a terrifying nightmare about that man. He started questioning whether he had become the man's next target just because he had seen him earlier. More importantly, he wondered if the man had somehow discovered his money. But that didn't seem likely. He came from a very poor family. Then another possibility crossed his mind. Could it be because of his unique system? But that didn't seem likely either. Only he could see it. The nightmare had been truly horrifying, and he hoped nothing like that would happen in real life. But at the very least, it made him realize that he needed to prepare himself in case something like this ever did happen. He had to act fast. No matter what, he needed to ensure his family's safety. Asterisk, they were his top priority after all asterisk. The next morning, as soon as he woke up, he ran straight to the apartment where that suspicious man was staying and knocked on his door. Inside, the man was complaining about how the police were looking for him. That was why he had been hiding there for a while. Since there were no security cameras on that street, he just needed to lay low until things calmed down. Then he heard a knock at the door and went to answer it. When he opened the door, he introduced himself, saying he was the new tenant in the building and had just moved in, trying to appear like a calm and friendly person. However, he quickly realized that he was talking to himself. When he looked around to see who had knocked, the protagonist had already slipped into his apartment and was sitting on his couch. The man was caught off guard, wondering where the hell this guy had come from and, more importantly, how he had entered so easily. But he needed to stay calm and act like a good person. Speaking in a relaxed tone, he told the protagonist that he had probably knocked on the wrong door and that this wasn't his apartment. The protagonist quickly dismissed that idea, saying that wasn't the case. Instead, he explained that his own TV was broken, and he had come over to watch soccer on his. He even mentioned that he had brought some snacks and drinks with him. Asterisk, this was straight up street smarts at play asterisk. The man sat on the couch next to the protagonist, silently debating whether this guy was some kind of secret agent or just an extremely friendly idiot. Either way, he needed to get him out of there to avoid any future problems. But pushing him out directly might cause issues as well. He had to make him leave on his own. He then casually asked whether the protagonist should be at school. The protagonist simply replied that he didn't have to go since it was the weekend. The man tried again, asking if his parents weren't worried about him. The protagonist made a pitiful face and asked if he wanted him to leave. He, upon realizing this, denies it, saying he was just worried about him. The protagonist then adds that he was just an innocent boy trying to befriend this gentleman, but unfortunately ended up disturbing him. He starts playing the victim, saying he had no friends and was a sad, lonely person. He then suggests that, as a way to make up for it, he would do a complete cleaning of his apartment. He moves toward the windows and opens the curtains, but the man immediately closes them. The protagonist tries to poke at his wound more by asking if he could clean his room since the man didn't want him touching the window. However, the man denies it and throws himself against the door to prevent him from entering. The man, slightly embarrassed, suggests that it was time for the protagonist to go home and have lunch. Fang then finally gives in and says he'd leave but would visit again in the future. As he was leaving the apartment, he trips over a box, which he definitely shouldn't have since it contained evidence of the crimes the man had committed before. When the man sees the protagonist on the floor, he kicks him in the stomach, sending him flying, and Fang finally feels that unmistakable thirst for blood he had felt the first time he saw him. He must have gotten goosebumps, huh? The protagonist steps back, saying he didn't need to worry about it and claiming he wouldn't tell anyone. The man puts a knife to his neck, saying he wouldn't tell anyone because he was going to die there. He then attacks him with a knife, but before he can do so, he freezes, starting to question why this was happening. Then he remembers the drink he had shared with the protagonist earlier, and it probably had something in it. Fang throws the knife away, grabs a broomstick, and breaks it over his head. However, the man quickly gets up and lands another punch to his stomach. After a brief fight in which the protagonist uses the broomstick remnants to hit him on the head, he finally knocks him out and discovers that the man is a level 2 martial artist. He realizes that even though his level was low, the man was very powerful. Had the protagonist not consumed the drug he had slipped into his drink, he probably wouldn't be alive right now. Go ahead, mess with the old guys and see what happens. A few moments later, the protagonist ties the man to a chair and starts counting the money he found in his smuggled bags. The man starts thinking to himself that he had realized this kid had a lot of blood and kai, but still appeared to be just a martial arts student. As a level 2 martial artist, he hadn't expected to be defeated by just a student. He gets angry and asks who the protagonist is. The protagonist then jokes, saying he's Detective X. The man realizes he's being mocked and starts asking more questions. After counting the money in the smuggled bags, the protagonist asks why a wanted criminal only had such a small amount of money and a few bottles of pills with him. The man obviously doesn't answer, but he needed those pills to become a level 3 martial artist. He hadn't expected them to end up in the hands of a kid like him. He then calls out to the protagonist and asks if he wants to make a deal. The deal between them was basically that the protagonist would release him and keep the money he had managed to get, and as a bonus, he would also take the bottles of pills that increase his blood and chi, claiming that all those pills together were worth millions. Upon hearing this, the protagonist wonders if everything in the martial arts world was this expensive, if just a few small bottles of pills could cost millions. expensive to the point it hurts, mercy. The man, upon realizing that the protagonist was almost fully giving in, says that these pills could help him with his martial arts exam and cultivation in the future. He begins trying to convince him, claiming that these pills were luxury items for any martial artist and much more effective than regular pills. He continues to try to persuade him, saying that if he let him go, he could keep all of that for himself. But if he handed him over to the police, all those items would be seized, and he would end up with nothing in the end. The man was actually just trying to buy time until the effects of the drug he had ingested from the drink wore off. The protagonist was questioning himself a lot about what the right choice was, since if he killed him, the police would find out anyway. And if he let him go, he would likely return for revenge, and since he was a level 2 martial artist, it would be a very risky move. So the most logical choice was to hand him over to the police, but those pills worth millions were preventing him from doing so, since they would also be confiscated. To become a martial artist, one needs around 150 blood and chi, and even if he accessed his system, that increase would still fall short compared to what those pills could offer. The protagonist then grabs another broomstick and asks the man if he would give him the items if he freed him. He confirms, saying he was a man of his word. The man finally manages to free himself from the restraints, and when he tries to attack the protagonist, he gets hit in the head with a broomstick, probably a fatal blow taught by his mother. Meanwhile, Wang was walking through a forest in the city, looking for someone. It was then that he received a call from the protagonist, asking if he was still in the city and telling him he had found the fugitive criminal and accidentally hurt him. Wang then rushes to where the protagonist is and is greeted at the door, where he is led to the criminal. When Wang enters the apartment, he sees the fugitive criminal Huan Bin tied to a chair by just a student. The protagonist then informs him that the man was unconscious at the moment and asks the university student if he would get any benefits by reporting him to the police. Wang doesn't understand what he's talking about and asks him to explain more. The protagonist says he'll get straight to the point and begins opening one of the criminal's bags, saying he had found many valuable items in the criminal's possession and would like to keep them for himself. Wang starts explaining to him that this criminal was responsible for the murder of many martial artists. The protagonist interrupts, saying that's exactly why he was asking for his help, suggesting they keep the items for themselves and stay quiet. He was getting too slick, huh? The university student tells the protagonist that he's not capable of absorbing those special pills since they're a level above his, and then he swaps the level 2 pills for some level 1 ones he had kept. He ends the conversation by saying that whenever the protagonist needs his help, he can count on him, and that he didn't need to worry about the criminal since he would take care of him. Before leaving, the protagonist asks Wang what they would do if the criminal decided to confess to the police. The university student tells him not to worry, saying the criminal wouldn't get a chance to open his mouth again. He had been a wanted criminal for a long time, so he would be killed anyway. A little later in the protagonist's room, he was now trying to figure out the best way to use those pills when he received a message on his phone saying that Wang had made a huge money transfer to his bank account, money that had previously belonged to the criminal. As soon as the money entered his account, his system updated instantly, and the values of his points were no longer the same. In the previous version of the system, the blood and chi could only be increased by 0.1, but now he could use his resources to increase them by 1. And when he did that, he realized that up until now, the rich had more benefits than the poor. While analyzing this, he received another message from Juan, asking if he had received the money and mentioning that he had also sent something to him that he would need in the future. While chatting with Wang via messages, his little sister interrupted by jumping on his back, saying she was hungry. You know, younger siblings really are a whole different species. She then went on to say that someone named Wang had sent something for him in the mail. When the protagonist took the envelope in his hands, he thought to himself that the delivery had been quick. His younger sister, remembering the name Wang, was surprised because she recalled that it was the name of that famous martial artist university student. She got really excited and tried to convince her older brother to get an autograph from him for her. His younger sister continued talking about how much money an autograph from him was worth, and then proposed a deal where she would get 70% of the profit and he would get 30%. After finishing her pitch, she realized that her brother had already left the room and started running after him, trying to improve the offer. A little later, now a bit farther from home, the protagonist finally decided to open the package he had received. As he did so, he wondered what could be inside since he had sent several messages and had received any replies. When he opened it, he found books teaching various techniques. He was very grateful to have received something like this because it was very important content for his future, just as Wang had said earlier. However, his house was small, and he probably wouldn't be able to apply these techniques there, so he would have to find another place to do it, somewhere more spacious, so to speak. A little later, the reason the protagonist had left for the street was revealed. He had to meet with a real estate agent he had contacted earlier. The agent took him to a residential complex that offered public transportation and very appropriate accommodation, not to mention that the residences there were the best on the market. The agent started talking about the prices of the residences, and they almost reached millions. The protagonist commented that the house they were in right now was very nice and must have cost a lot. The agent, thinking that he looked like just a student, told him that the house was indeed a bit expensive and asked if he would like to see a cheaper one. The protagonist, however, declined, took out a card from his pocket, and asked if there was any kind of discount for paying in full. Upon hearing this, the agent's eyes lit up, and he began a sequence of responses, saying he would do his best to secure a huge discount for him, along with various benefits like the fastest internet on the market, unlimited TV plans, and the best sound quality possible. He continued, telling the protagonist that if he signed the contract alone, he could get a discount up to 95%, not to mention that their company would cover the residential fees and maintenance costs. If he started with a 20% deposit, he could ask the manager for additional discounts to help with the move. The agent then said that this residence seemed perfect for him, claiming he knew the protagonist was a young person with a promising future ahead. The protagonist simply asked when he could move in, and the agent responded that as soon as he wanted, his team would help immediately. Talk about a sudden attitude change, huh? A little later, the protagonist was heading back home, and the main question on his mind was how he was going to explain all this to his parents. He probably should keep it a secret for now, since he now had a place to train and some time to gather furniture and other equipment as well. As he walked down the street, a television was broadcasting a battle between Master Mei and Ta Mu. The journalist covering the fight claimed that he and his team were about 5 kilometers away, yet they could still see the immense impact of their strikes. They decided to get closer to try and capture better footage. The forest, which had originally been surrounded only by trees, was now completely devastated. As they got closer, massive stones were thrown in their direction, causing the cameras to break and the recording to stop. A crowd had already gathered to watch the fight on public television, and everyone was commenting on how incredible it was to witness such a battle live. One of them even said that they'd heard the two were just fighting for fun and not taking it seriously. Good old sparring. The broadcast resumed, with the journalist apologizing for the inconvenience, stating that he didn't believe they would be hit by debris from the battle, even at that distance. He added that if they weren't level 3 martial artists, they would probably have been killed by now. The protagonist, while watching this, wondered if he would ever be able to become as strong as them. One day, he would be a grandmaster too. In a furniture store, a couple was arguing about purchasing a new piece of furniture. The store clerk complimented the woman on her excellent taste, saying the sofa she was looking at was of great quality, and he could get them a fantastic deal. Her husband said he would think about it, and the woman began to make a huge drama, questioning if he really loved her. When he finally decided to buy the sofa, the salesman apologized, saying the sofa had already been ordered by someone else. He then pointed at the protagonist, who was smiling at them. It was already night, and inside the protagonist's house, his little sister was asking their mother why he was so late. She joked that he was probably eating something delicious outside, and if that was the case, she'd give him a lesson. Their mother reminded her that she had forgotten what her brother had said on the phone earlier, that since the martial arts exams were coming up, he was training for them. Mama protecting her little cub. In the protagonist's new house, he was now training the techniques he had learned from that book. Everything was really taxing his whole body. The human body consists of 206 bones as well as muscles and organs, and as a martial artist, you have to ensure that all these different parts of the body work together. If someone wanted to make their bones more resilient, whether as a martial artist or not, they could do this through a technique called the path of hardening. This technique focuses on understanding Qi and blood, significantly boosting the body's resistance, while at the same time, the bones absorb Qi and blood, further increasing their resilience. The protagonist then remembered a conversation he had with Wang, where he asked if he could increase his Qi and blood levels or his bone resistance even more, or if he needed to take a break between these increases. Wang on the call told him that he could do that, explaining that when practiced properly, the effective increase rate would rise, but it would still be very difficult since it was an arduous training. He suggested that if the protagonist wanted to train with alternating work, he could choose to focus on one part at a time for better improvement. If he trained the upper part of his body, it would become more stable, and if he trained the lower part, he would have better balance and speed control. The protagonist responded that he would prefer to train his lower body and asked what kind of exercises he should do for that. Wang replied that he would need to practice the horse stance, which was the first step to train the lower body. Wang continued, saying that he had a warning for him. His blood and Qi levels weren't bad, and he could pass the physical exams with no problem. However, using the techniques he was currently studying would increase those levels over time, but it would reduce his current points, making the exam more difficult. If he got injured during his training, he might not be able to pass the exam. The protagonist, though, ignored this advice and began training with everything he had, saying he didn't care much about the exam since he could retake it the following year. If he pushed beyond his limits, his strength would increase significantly. By the end of his training, he had perfected the technique. Lying on the ground, he noticed that his blood and Qi levels had drastically decreased, so he used his system to boost them again. To his surprise, he saw that the limits had also increased with the training he had done. Other people could only cultivate once every 3 days and needed to use hundreds of thousands of pills and medicines to replenish their Qi and blood. For the protagonist, the more his body could endure the training, the more cultivation he could perform. Knowing this filled him with confidence, thinking that he could probably surpass Wang with his system and become more powerful than him. Days passed, and all of his classmates were also training as hard as they could to prepare for the exams. Enjoying the story so far? Then drop a like to show your support and let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next stories. They're gonna be just as great. The day of the exams finally arrived, and the protagonist's classmates were discussing the minimum score from last year, which had been 124, and their current score of 104. They were a little desperate, but still had hope. One of them reassured the others, saying they just needed to remember the techniques Wang had taught them to boost their blood and Qi. The protagonist was simply observing and talking when another of his classmates asked how his blood and Qi levels were at that moment, when they were interrupted by the arrival of someone. The man who interrupted them asked if he was speaking to Fang Ping, and the protagonist confirmed, asking if he needed something. His classmates immediately recognized the man as Tam Ping, the vice president of the education agency. He explained that he needed to speak with the protagonist and asked if they could give them privacy. Tan, when the protagonist's luck seems to have changed, goes straight to the point and begins talking about the state in which they live, mentioning that it has 5 districts and 3 prefectures in one city. In the city where they live, there aren't as many martial artists compared to the prefectures, but they are stronger than those from the 5 districts. Every year there is an evaluation to assess the quantity and strength of these martial artists. Tan continues by saying that the districts and prefectures view Yang City as an inconvenience to them. He then asks the protagonist if his blood and Qi levels are above 120. The protagonist answers that he isn't sure yet and would have to check later. The vice president continues, saying that he had met with Wang some time ago and Wang mentioned the protagonist's name. He claims that if the protagonist made a good impression on Wang, then he must be someone special. Tan goes on, saying that before the exams start, the protagonist should explode his blood and Qi points to pressure the competitors from other districts and prefectures. He tells him to keep in mind that emotions have a significant effect on a person's blood and Qi. If the people around him are weak, he will gain confidence and thus perform better. He warns that if the people around him are stronger, it could cause anxiety and a lack of confidence, making it harder for him to perform well. The protagonist then realizes that Tan wants him to use his blood and Qi to make the other students anxious. He responds saying that this would be irrational because if he exploded his blood and Qi points before the exams, it would affect his score in the physical tests. Tan reassures him, saying that if he gives his best and shows his full score, they would give him a special blood and Qi pill worth millions. He adds that being a martial artist means having courage, and the protagonist must give his all to achieve this. Feeling sympathy for his opponents is not something they do. The protagonist agrees to the proposal, and when he shakes hands with the vice president, Tan feels a massive pressure and realizes that the protagonist's points are probably much higher than he expected. Meanwhile, the protagonist's classmates, while walking through the area, are talking when one of them accidentally bumps into a guy from another school. He's rude to her, saying that someone as weak as her could never become a martial artist. She seems to have hurt her shoulder from the contact with him. One of the protagonist's classmates rushes toward him, demanding an apology, but the guy justifies himself, claiming that it was her fault for bumping into him, and that it's not his fault that she got hurt. He then starts insulting them all, saying they are losers compared to him. The protagonist steps in before anything happens and begins speaking, telling them that there will always be weak rats like this guy along the way. He releases his energy so the guy can feel the pressure. As the protagonist releases his energy, everyone around him collapses to their knees, and even the arrogant guy is brought to his knees. The vice president is watching this from a distance and notices that the pressure the protagonist is exuding is almost that of a powerful martial artist. He wonders just how strong the protagonist has become after all this training. As the protagonist and his group walk through the testing facility, the people around them talk about the immense pressure they felt earlier, saying they couldn't even breathe properly because of it. One person mentions having heard that it was the pressure of a student from Yang City, which makes them question why it didn't make sense. The protagonist, now feeling full of himself, is suddenly pulled by the arm into a room. That was strange and unexpected, but okay. He then meets with the vice president again, who offers him a level 1 blood and Qi pill, claiming that with it he could surpass his maximum limits. However, the protagonist says he cannot accept it, arguing that the effects of this pill would be too harsh for him since he isn't a martial artist yet. It would likely cause serious damage to his body, maybe even kill him. Tan tells him not to worry, claiming that his foundations are solid and that everything would be fine. If he could take the pill, he would be the martial artist with the highest score in the physical tests. He insists again that he won't take the pill, but the vice president says it's an order from the president of the education agency, and rejecting a request from a level 3 martial artist would not benefit him. Basically, he was asking him to accept under pressure. The protagonist then realizes he is being blackmailed and reminds Tan that Wang reached level 3 recently. He suggests that the vice president call Wang to see what he has to say about this. Tan quickly apologizes, saying he is becoming impatient because it's an urgent situation, then asks the protagonist what he wants in exchange for taking the pill. Fang says he wants 2 pills and an additional 2 million in money, and with that, he would risk his life for the request. Tan thinks to himself that no matter who the president is, he would surely accept as there's so much at stake. The deal is made, and Tan agrees to the terms. As the protagonist is leaving, he tells the vice president to ask for 3 pills and keep one for himself. Tan, hearing this, questions whether he's really just a student and why he's trying to benefit him. Shortly after, the students are doing the physical tests in machines that resemble capsules. The president starts getting nervous, noticing that none of the students have reached 120 points. He finally finds Fang Ping's name, which is still under review. He asks the examiners to speed up his results, and they do so. Inside the capsule, the protagonist thinks there are no security cameras inside, so he says it's time for the show to begin. Upon ingesting the pill, he feels a completely different sensation than before. Even though it's a level 1 pill, the power is completely different from the others and from his system. The president is monitoring the results, and when he sees that the score is at 119, he thinks to himself that he will never forgive the protagonist if his investment turns out to be a waste. However, his thoughts are quickly interrupted when he sees that the score jumps to 149 points, once again surpassing his limits. After the physical tests are finished, all the students are gathered in a meeting room. A man announces that the education agency has revealed the required blood and key points for this round are around 115 points, which causes panic among everyone. They argue that this is too high, especially since last year it was only 112. Seeing the students panic, the man tells them not to worry, saying there's another way for them to pass. He then starts announcing the names of those who passed this phase. One of the protagonist's classmates asks why he's so calm since this requirement is so high. The protagonist responds that it's not that high, and his classmate asks what his current level is. He answers that he's probably around 149 points and that it's a joke. When it was time to announce the protagonist's name, the man started trembling, saying they should congratulate student Fang Ping for his excellent result of 149 points, the highest score in the physical exams. As soon as he said that, all the students were shocked and began commenting about him, wondering who he was and where he came from. The protagonist's classmate asked how he managed to achieve that, but he didn't get an answer. The man continued, saying that those who had passed shouldn't be sad because there would always be another chance to take the exam, and thanked everyone for their presence. And that's that. One of the protagonist's classmates started crying because she didn't pass, saying that her parents had used all their savings to put her through this exam and she didn't know what to say to them now. The protagonist, noticing her sadness, thought to himself that this test was indeed difficult for most people and wondered about the privilege he had to pass this way. He then turned to his friend, telling her that he knew what she was going through was tough. But she didn't need to worry. She would definitely pass next time. He also remembered she liked French fries and invited her to go eat, saying it would be on him, and she should feel free to order whatever she wanted. His classmates, hearing this, told her to ask for whatever she wanted and encouraged her, saying that with the strength she had, she could easily pass next time. She started feeling better, and they went out to eat. On their way back, they were interrupted by a man who asked them if they didn't think the martial arts exams were extremely unfair, claiming that those who didn't pass were forced to live in a lower class. He questioned why they should follow these rules, stating that around 2012 the whole world would end because of these martial arts, but he and his group were trying to save humanity from it, asking them to join them. Another lunatic, how wonderful. Fang could only think about who this mysterious man was. The man kept asking for their help to fight against these injustices, but the group thought together that the guy was way too strange, so they quickly left. However, this man managed to grab one of their female friends' hands and told her he would take her somewhere, assuring her that she didn't need to worry because they wouldn't harm her. The protagonist told him to let her go and release his energy, causing the man to feel his pressure and let go of his friend. The protagonist wondered if this was some kind of cult, and especially why no one had done anything about these people bothering others on the street. One of his classmates told them to ignore the guy and leave. As the protagonist left with his friends, he told himself not to worry about this for now, as his priority was the physical exams and the written tests that awaited him. They then left together, and the mysterious man stayed behind, smiling at them. "I'd be running. That guy's weird." Sometime later, the tests were carried out. The physical exams were quite similar to Olympic events, and the written tests seemed like just another school exam. After a while, the exams were finally over, and the students who had finished were now meeting their families outside. The protagonist was looking for his family when a van stopped in front of the testing location, and inside it was that mysterious man who had a tattoo on his face. This time, he was accompanied by a woman who had the same tattoo in the same spot just below her left eye. The man said to her that this was the student with extremely high blood and ki, the one he had mentioned earlier. She responded that these kinds of people were the seeds of martial artists, the future of the special authoritarian hierarchy. At the back of the van, there were more people with the same tattoo, claiming that these kinds of people should die. She confirmed, saying that these people were sinners who couldn't be saved anymore and that they were the only ones who could purify them. She then told the group to take care of the other students while the protagonist was hers. The group got out of the van armed with metal rods and charged at the students, causing chaos among the students and their families. The protagonist, while wondering what was happening, was taken by surprise by the woman from the van who tried to hit him with one of her punches. He defended himself, but he still felt the impact. When he looked at her face, he noticed that the tattoo on her face was the same as the one on the strange man he had seen earlier. The protagonist began fighting with her, but he was at a disadvantage since he hadn't learned any important combat techniques. She managed to knock him down, and just as she was about to hit his face, he managed to strike her leg, causing her to lose balance. She was left wobbly. The punch that was supposed to hit his face ended up destroying the ground beneath him. When he realized the power they had, he concluded that they were trying to kill him and wondered what level she must be at to have destroyed the ground with just one punch. In his previous fight against that wanted criminal, he only won because of his extensive preparation. But now, facing a martial artist like this, there was nothing he could do. He couldn't react to her next punch, but she didn't succeed, as she was struck by one of the security guards who was there, and he completely destroyed her face with just one punch. He told the protagonist that he didn't expect these people to cause such a commotion in a testing center like this, and then asked if the protagonist had been hurt. When the protagonist saw that woman defeated on the ground, he was extremely surprised by the strength of that man, as he had completely destroyed her head with just one punch. The man asked if the protagonist was okay, saying that anyone would feel sick after seeing something like that for the first time. The protagonist asked who he was, and he replied that he was from the detective agency. The protagonist asked who those people were, and the man answered that they were probably just another group of lunatics. Fang was extremely angry, complaining that an attack like this wasn't something as simple as just a group of lunatics, as this person had genuinely tried to kill him. The detective then began explaining that the authorities were already trying to resolve the situation by sending soldiers and detectives throughout the city, and that this kind of thing wouldn't happen again. The vice president arrived running, asking if the protagonist was okay. When he got to him, he asked why there was so much blood on him and if he needed to go to a hospital. The detective told him to relax, and when he heard the name Fang Ping, he questioned if this was the student who had gotten the highest score in blood and shui levels. As the saying goes, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. The vice president then realized that the detective was a colleague of his named Zhang, and went on to say that he had seen many of their agency members while he was around and believed this wasn't just a simple attack. The detective confirmed that he was right, saying that this wasn't the first time this group had attacked martial arts students, and that these people hated martial artists without exception. He explained that these students were just privileged kids who hadn't learned combat tactics yet, and because of that, they decided that students were the best targets to collaborate with in destroying this hierarchy. But they never thought they'd cause an attack like this on an exam day. He couldn't believe there was a martial artist among these terrorists. Cam was surprised and asked who she was, and the detective replied that she was the one who had been attacking the protagonist. The vice president then thanked him profusely for saving the student, saying that if he hadn't arrived in time, they would have lost a prodigy. When the protagonist found out that there was only one martial artist among the entire group of terrorists and that she had targeted him, he questioned why he had been chosen. He'd assumed that it was probably just a coincidence this time, but he wasn't sure if he would encounter another one like her along the way. He started to worry that this was more dangerous than he had expected, especially since he hadn't even entered the world of martial arts yet. He wondered how he could ever become a grandmaster if he couldn't even protect himself. There's still a long road ahead, young grasshopper, be patient. Another detective reported the situation to Zhang, stating that the cultists had been captured, 3 of them were killed, and 20 students were seriously injured, with 9 of them having fractures. They probably wouldn't be able to continue attending the martial arts school again. The vice director said that he could go handle the cult issue, as the educational agency would take care of the students' problems. at least in theory. When the protagonist was alone with the vice president, Tan kept asking if he was okay, saying that if he were hurt, it would be hard to explain to the president. The protagonist then asked if he could teach him combat tactics. When Tan questioned if he really wanted that, Fang confirmed, saying that he needed to get even stronger. The vice president explained that once he entered a martial arts university, they would teach combat tactics. However, in a peaceful era like this, it wasn't necessary to learn such things. Upon hearing this, the protagonist asked what he meant, since the martial artists he often saw on TV seemed to have great knowledge of combat tactics. Tan continues, saying that he didn't need to be so surprised, as most martial artists today didn't actually learn those techniques. They simply made their bones more resistant and strong and fortified their blood and Kai. The vice president then said he would take him to get cleaned up, grab a new uniform, and give him a ride to visit his parents afterward. A little later, the two were in the car, and the protagonist was trying to contact Juan, but he couldn't get a response or even a call. He really wanted to ask him about martial artists. The vice president noticed that he seemed a little worried and asked if no one was answering him. The protagonist said no, and the vice president then took his phone and transferred $2 million to him. When the protagonist received the bank notification, he realized that he had been so busy with the tests that he had forgotten about it. He never thought they would give him the money. The vice president began praising his performance in the blood and Kai tests, saying that this was his reward for doing so well, and motivated him by saying that he had high expectations for him. This left the protagonist excited. With that amount of money, it's hard to stay sad. When the protagonist finally arrived home with the vice president, his parents greeted him with a big celebration for having achieved the highest score in the blood and Kai exams in the city. When they noticed Tan's presence, they asked who he was, and the protagonist introduced them. The three were surprised when they discovered who this man was. His family welcomed the vice president into their home and offered him tea, saying that the protagonist hadn't mentioned his arrival, so they hadn't prepared anything. His mother offered to go buy some food for them, but the vice president said it was fine and that he just wanted to have a conversation with the protagonist's father. Fang's younger sister commented that it was very cool for the vice president of the educational agency to bring him home personally. The protagonist agreed with her but still didn't know why he was there. The vice president started talking to the protagonist's father, apologizing for arriving at their house so suddenly. He then continued, saying that the education agency would actually like to know more about the protagonist's family, and if they were interested, his father could be hired as a guard for the education agency. The monthly pay would be $5,000 with several benefits and free insurance. The protagonist's father was surprised when he heard this offer, as the amount was very high. His younger sister also overheard and got excited, saying that if he accepted, he wouldn't get so tired. The protagonist also added that it would be a great opportunity for him. The father felt a little embarrassed, and before responding, the vice president said that he had to leave. The protagonist's family tried to convince him to stay for dinner, but he said he was in a hurry and thanked them for everything. The protagonist took him to the door and seized the opportunity to ask if they would be free the next day. His family asked why, and he answered that the education agency had given them a new house and they could visit it tomorrow. This left the three of them extremely surprised. New house, new life for the family. The next day, the protagonist and his family visited a house he had purchased earlier. They were amazed by its size, and his younger sister ran up the stairs to explore the house. His parents sat on the couch and commented that it was the first time in their lives they had seen a prize in the form of a house. His mother remarked that the house was fully furnished and wondered how much the department must have spent on it. His father looked at the protagonist seriously and asked if this house was really a prize from the education department. Fang started to wonder if he should tell the truth, but before he could respond, his parents, seeing the giant TV in the living room, ran to see what it was like. This gave him some time to come up with an answer. When they returned, he said that the department had made an exception and gave them this house, but they shouldn't tell anyone else. His mother replied that he was already getting many benefits before even becoming a martial artist and couldn't imagine what awaited him when he became one. His younger sister mentioned that there was a garden upstairs, and his parents left the room to check it out. Maybe they'll find a secret passage. The protagonist was now alone in the living room watching TV when the journalist announced on the news that there had been an earthquake with a magnitude of 8.0. When the protagonist heard this, he wondered if it could have been the result of martial artist powers. The journalist continued, saying that thanks to the warnings from the grandmasters, the citizens had been able to evacuate in time, preventing a large number of accidents. The rescue team was already on its way to the affected area. After seeing the news, Fang realized that martial artists weren't as useless as the vice president had said earlier. He now wanted to be exactly that kind of martial artist, one strong enough to protect others. The protagonist was interrupted by a call from Wang, and the two began to talk. Just a regular chat. During their conversation, the protagonist started by saying that he had been trying to call Wang for a few days but couldn't get any response. The university student explained that he had been on some missions during those days and couldn't take his phone with him. He then added that he had seen the protagonist's message about reaching 149 points and said it wasn't bad at all. He continued, saying that the protagonist probably didn't just want to hear some words of congratulations and asked the reason for the call. The protagonist then replied that a few days ago he had completed the basic stage of bone reinforcement, and his points had increased to 150. Wang asked him if he was decided to become a martial artist directly. The protagonist declined, saying he wasn't ready yet, and then, a little embarrassed, asked for his help to learn battle tactics. He continued, saying that he had heard before that these tactics had to be based on real fights, and he wanted to cultivate them, but had no one to help him with that. The university student replied that battle tactics were indeed very important, but it wasn't the best time for him to cultivate them yet. He explained that 150 points were the minimum a normal person needed to become a martial artist, and as long as he wasn't one, continuing to cultivate his points would help a lot more in the future. He then recommended that the protagonist reinforce his bones for the second time since his goal was long-term. The two were still talking when Wang asked if he felt that his bone reinforcement was becoming slower. The protagonist confirmed, and Wang continued, saying that if the circumstances allowed, he could buy some liquids that would increase his physical strength and take a bath with them. By doing this, he could speed up his bone reinforcement again. When the protagonist heard this recommendation, he asked why he hadn't heard about it earlier. Wang replied that it was normal for him not to have heard about it, as usually only those who had reached their limits in every aspect used such liquids. Furthermore, they were difficult to access, and Wang added that he would send some for the protagonist to pick up at school. 3 bottles cost 500,000, which was very expensive, but he wouldn't waste any of it. After this call, the protagonist began another round of training and studies to prepare better, pushing his limits once again. A month later, the protagonist was in a bath with a special liquid that increased some of his attributes, and his points were now 162. If he kept up this pace, he could reach 170 in less than a month. The protagonist spent 500,000 on these 3 bottles of special liquid, and his system informed him that the market value was 600,000. This meant that these products were probably not immune to inflation, and if he saved some for the future, he could make a lot of money by selling them. Everything pointed to selling these pills being a good way to make money. Later that same day, the protagonist was with his family in front of a computer to check the results. When his family saw his extremely high score of 149, they were very happy with their son's achievement, claiming he was a pride for the family. After the event, his younger sister started selling autographs of her brother, and his parents thanked all the phone calls from friends and family congratulating their son on the achievement. The protagonist was sitting there, watching them celebrate the results. It was then that when he took his phone from his pocket to check if there were any messages, Wang notified him that he was in town and invited him to meet up. To talk better, at least. The protagonist went to a court in the city to meet his friend. When he got there, he saw Wang playing with a child and said he didn't know he was bringing his younger sister. The university student explained that actually that was his teacher's daughter. The protagonist tried to introduce himself to her, but he noticed she was very shy and stepped away from him. Wang then told her to go play a little because he had something to take care of. The protagonist asked him if he had become a part-time babysitter. Wang replied, saying this wasn't a game, and there were some things he didn't need to know, at least for now. Fang didn't understand very well, and soon after, his friend threw a punch at him. He dodged it easily. Wang said that apparently he had finally completed the second round of his bone reinforcement and invited him to train. The protagonist tried to reject the invitation, saying he had just completed the round recently. At that moment, Wang was a level 3 martial artist, while the protagonist wasn't even a martial artist yet and had no chance of winning in a training fight. The university student hit him in the face, questioning how he expected to become a martial artist without fighting first. When the protagonist was on the ground, his friend explained that his legs were weak and his body was losing balance, and any attack could destabilize him completely. He asked how he expected to train his combat strategy this way and charged at him again. The protagonist managed to dodge and was praised for his speed. He replied that it was because of Wang's teachings. The university student said it was his own merit, not Wang's, and attacked him again. Humility mixed with punches, quite an interesting combination. While they fought, Wang began to talk about how, at the beginning of the year, he was just a normal person. But after the incident with the wanted criminal, he discovered that he was actually a prodigy. Even so, he didn't expect to complete the second round of his bone reinforcement in less than 2 months. His talents and abilities always surprised him. The protagonist, while dodging, started saying that those comments were inflating his ego. However, when he said this, Wang grabbed his arm and threw him to the ground, saying he expected the protagonist to enter the same martial arts university as him. Now lying on the ground after being thrown by his friend, the protagonist commented on why Wang had brought up the university. Wang replied that since he was one of the top students at that institution, he could always help him when needed and provide some resources until he reached level 3, just like him. The protagonist was surprised to hear this because before reaching level 3, he would probably have to spend more than 10 million just on reinforcement pills. Wang said that the decision was up to him, as with his abilities he could enter any martial arts university, especially one of the elite ones. Nice to hear, indeed. When Fang heard this, he claimed it was the first time someone told him he could enter one of those elite martial arts universities and asked if their selection process was really that good. Wang confirmed, saying that they were famous institutions and naturally, they were much better than regular martial arts universities. The most important thing was the resources. In their nation, the largest resources usually came from the two biggest elite martial arts universities, which had powerful and famous alumni who supported the institutions and provided extreme financial backing. Wang had also heard that sometimes they would even provide reinforcement pills and points for free when a student reached level 1. When the protagonist heard this, he questioned if it was really free, since there were usually thousands of new students every year, and they must spend around 800 million. These universities really seemed out of the ordinary. Wang continued, saying that aside from the subsidies from the institution, he would have to fight for the remaining resources on his own. This meant that the number of missions he would have to complete while studying at the martial arts university would be extremely important. He reminded him of the wanted criminal he helped to take down. Fang confirmed that he remembered that, and his friend continued, saying that it was actually a mission he needed to complete. It's very important to take as many missions as possible while studying at a regular martial arts university, and sometimes there wouldn't be enough missions available to complete. That would be a big problem for sure. However, in the two elite martial arts universities, the situation was different. One was located in the capital city at the center of politics, and the other was in the magical city, where the financial center was. Both were large cities with countless missions offering incredible rewards, some of which were so simple that they were just deliveries. Regardless if he had enough ability, he could still earn equivalent rewards. There was also a third aspect, which was the real reason everyone always rushed to try to get into one of these two universities. The protagonist asked what this other reason was. Wang continued, saying that it was a common aspect that regular martial arts universities could never compete with: powerful resources for teaching. At the university he attended, a teacher needed to be at least a level 3 martial artist, and if they reached level 4, they could become a counselor. Those who reached level 5 would be the leaders of the school. In these two elite universities, the minimum score was higher, and the minimum requirement to teach there was level 4. As far as he knew, the Magical City's elite martial arts university had around 4 Grandmasters. But these were just external conditions. The key would always be in his hands. If he was capable, he could do whatever he wanted, regardless of the institution. Which is true. The university student called out to the little girl, saying it was time to leave, and told the protagonist to think carefully about his decision. He sincerely hoped he would enter the same martial arts university as him. As he left, the protagonist thought to himself that before he could reach level 3, all the pills combined would cost him tens of millions. It seemed like his friend wanted him to attend the same university, and the main reason for his suspicion was the excellent offer he had made. However, above all, the two largest elite martial arts universities in the nation were the best choices for the long-term development of his future, and now he was at an impasse about which decision to make. Sometime later, the protagonist received an acceptance letter from a university, and now he was at the train station with his parents. While adjusting his backpack, his mother asked if he had brought everything he needed, warning him not to forget anything. His father told him to call if he didn't have enough money, saying he would send more if needed. His younger sister was hugging his mother, and his mother pointed out that his older brother was leaving, asking if she wouldn't say a few words of farewell. The protagonist replied that she didn't need to worry since he would come back, and then said goodbye to his family. As he was about to get on the train, his younger sister ran toward him, saying that he had to tell her when he found a girlfriend so she could share all of his bad habits and flaws. She started crying, telling him to take care of himself while she wasn't around. They said their goodbyes, and the protagonist boarded his train. That emotional farewell moment we all love to see. The magical city is the location of the nation's financial center. It is a vast and large place, and even people without good family backgrounds could achieve success through their own merit. When the protagonist got off the train, he noticed that a large part of the people walking around were martial artists, and he was surprised by the sheer number of them. While he was observing the people, a police officer greeted him and asked to see his identification card. The protagonist handed it over, and the officer said that the equipment showed his points were at 199. There was no record showing he was a martial artist. Therefore, they couldn't just let him roam freely around the city. Fang explained that he wasn't a martial artist, which surprised the officer. He then continued, saying that he was a rookie at the elite martial arts university in the magical city, and had stopped by to familiarize himself with the surroundings. Doing that famous exploration, the officer thought to himself that for a rookie from this university, he really had an extremely high number, which was quite impressive. He then told the protagonist that he would help him register first, since usually this martial arts university took care of all preparations for students a few days before classes started. Since the protagonist had arrived early, the officer would take him to get a temporary martial artist pass. Just like how human weapons were above normal people, martial arts weren't much different from walking firearms, and because of this, the magical city had to impose some additional restrictions. Since it was such a large city, it conducted many strict checks. A few hours later, the protagonist got his temporary pass, and when he looked at it, he realized it was very similar to an identification card. His new life in the magical city was becoming more exciting. He then took his luggage with him to the university where he would study and was already surprised by the huge entrance to the institution. A voice near him claimed that it seemed like he hadn't seen much in his life and asked if he was the new student. The protagonist confirmed and asked who he was. The man introduced himself as Qin Fengking, a third-year student at this university. He then pulled a knife from his pocket and with some wild movements turned it into a sword, swinging it in the protagonist's direction at an extremely fast pace. The protagonist told him that it was very dangerous to draw a sword like that in a public space. Qin replied, saying that he was the rookie who had already completed bone reinforcement twice, claiming that his conditioning wasn't bad at all, and finally asked his name. After introducing himself, his senior recognized him, saying that, as expected, the rookie who completed bone reinforcement twice belonged to their university. As he was leaving, he told him to trust him, claiming that choosing this university was the right decision. A sign has already been received here. While leaving, Qin began to question himself about the accent of that guy, which sounded a bit familiar. He wondered where that accent was from, but soon forgot about it, dismissing it as unimportant. He then reached into his pocket and took out some pills, saying that this time he had gotten some that would help with his reinforcement. After he improved the bones in his upper body, he would definitely be able to crush the Nanjing Martial Arts University, the same one as Wang's. The protagonist was walking, reading a map of the university that showed all the campus locations to help them navigate, which seemed like a difficult task since it was such a large place. When he reached the dormitory, he noticed that it was a little different from the entrance, as it was more worn down. Upon entering the dormitory area, he approached a woman reading a magazine at the reception. She asked if he was a new student. He confirmed and showed her his confirmation documents. The woman said he was registering too early as the university hadn't even finished the preparations yet. She added that usually new students came 3 to 5 days before classes started, but he had arrived a month early. Such good punctuality can be too much. While she was checking his documents on the computer, the protagonist said he was really excited to start at the university, so he came early to check things out. She responded that the fact that he came to check things out had complicated her daily work schedule. He apologized for causing trouble. The woman then continued, saying that the university dorms hadn't opened yet and that it would be up to him to find a place to stay. That's when she looked at his documents and realized he was Fang Ping, the new student with 199 points and double bone reinforcement. Upon seeing this, she quickly stands up and asks him to rest a bit while she arranges for him to be placed in the university hotel as soon as possible. The protagonist is surprised by her sudden change in attitude. She then asks if he has plans to advance and become a martial artist. If he does, she tells him to inform the university so they can immediately arrange for advisors to help him. Fang wonders if that can really be done since the university classes haven't started yet, and she affirms, stating that their martial arts university has more privileges than others. Since he is a potential martial artist and has already completed bone reinforcement twice, he is definitely a genius among all the new students. If he wants to advance and become a martial artist as quickly as possible, the university will certainly arrange for advisors to assist him in that journey. Now everyone is humble, huh? The protagonist starts thinking about what would have happened if he hadn't completed the bone reinforcement twice and had taken a break when he reached 150 points. Would the university treat him the same way? Just then, the man interrupts their conversation and the woman introduces him, saying that this man is one of the managers of the university hotel, Lai Cheng's. Lai says he rushed over immediately when he heard that an outstanding student had arrived and begins talking to the protagonist, introducing himself and commenting that his achievement of completing bone reinforcement twice makes him an incredible person for his young age and little experience. The protagonist feels a bit embarrassed and can only thank him. The man takes his luggage and tells him that he should feel free to ask for help after he settles into the university hotel. The protagonist tries to grab his luggage to avoid causing trouble, but the man tells him not to worry about it, as it is his job. They then head outside, and the protagonist is surprised to find a luxury car waiting for them. When he arrives at the hotel, he realizes it is a 5-star hotel, equipped with everything and more luxury than he could have imagined. The protagonist asks if all of this is really free for him, and the man confirms, saying that all expenses for students at the hotel are covered by the university, so he doesn't need to worry about that. And here's how the story wraps up. And that's today's story. Did you enjoy it? If so, leave a like and let me know in the comments what stories you want to see next. I'm always keeping an eye on the comments and bringing you the best stories. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your friends who also like manhwas, and see you in the next video. Stay tuned.